This isn't a discussion, Sarah. 150,000, it's your duty.
Grow up! Send the wire! No. Be serious, you owe me!
The helicopter's annual insurance costs more than your opportunity.
Where did you get this money? Who gave it to you?
I earned it, you just never looked.
The wall holds. Any direct contact is harassment.
Your fortress is now ironclad. They don't get my piece. Not anymore. Send it.
I am her father. Let me up!
Miss Parker is not accepting unannounced visitors.
You will regret this.
Regret built your life.
I built mine. No one makes 60 million legally. Who set you up?
Tell us the truth. Whose money is this?
Mine!
Every dollar. Then
Your duty.
I'm Sarah, and for 32 years, I was the responsible daughter in a family that had a golden boy brother. And then there was me. After 8 years of grinding in silence, I'd just sold my tech company, and this family meeting was supposed to be my chance to finally secure their future. But instead of gratitude, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, quote, "This isn't a discussion, Sarah. Your brother needs $150,000. It is your duty to provide it." Duty. In that single moment, I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was just an ATM, a faceless, walking bank account. They had no idea that while they were demanding a handout, I had already called in the cavalry. A $60 million cavalry, to be exact. If you've ever been treated like an option instead of a priority by your own family, let me know where you're watching from. And make sure you like and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss the moment their entire world came crashing down. My family thought I was struggling. They pictured me in some tiny, sad apartment, eating instant noodles and counting pennies until my next paycheck. That narrative, it worked for them. It made them feel secure in their own choices, in their own little world. But the truth? The truth was so much bigger than they could ever imagine. While they were busy pitying me, I was building an empire. Their condescension, it became the perfect camouflage, the greatest asset I never knew I had. After my father laughed at my first startup idea, something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, cold click. The part of me that craved their approval, it just died. And in its place, something else was born. Something focused. Something relentless. I took out a small business loan using the meager savings I had scraped together. I rented a tiny, windowless office above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of burnt fabric and regret. That little room became my entire world. I worked until the letters on my screen blurred together. I slept on an old couch I found on the curb, using my jacket as a pillow. My diet consisted of black coffee and sheer willpower. I sacrificed birthdays, holidays, friendships, everything. All for this one, singular goal. This idea that everyone, especially my own family, had called a childish fantasy. My company, Parker Security Solutions, started with just me and a laptop. My goal was simple but ambitious: to create a cybersecurity system so intuitive and powerful that it could protect small businesses from the kind of sophisticated attacks usually reserved for Fortune 500 companies. The first 2 years were brutal. I was burning through cash, facing rejection after rejection from investors who saw a young woman trying to break into a male-dominated field and just couldn't see past their own biases. I almost went bankrupt. Twice. I remember one specific night, sitting on the floor of my office, staring at an eviction notice. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom, a picture of Kevin on a yacht in the Caribbean. A little family vacation they'd taken without me. The caption read, "Thinking of you. Wish you could afford to be here." I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just saved the picture. And I went back to work. Then came the breakthrough. A piece of predictive threat detection software I had been developing for 18 months finally worked. It was a game changer. It didn't just react to threats. It anticipated them. The first major contract I landed was with a mid-sized regional bank. They were skeptical at first. But after my system stopped a massive ransomware attack that would have cost them millions, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Parker security. My team grew from 1 to 5, then to 20, then to over 100 brilliant, hungry engineers and developers who believed in my vision. We weren't just a company. We were a unit. I remember walking through our new state-of-the-art office, hearing the buzz of collaboration, seeing the passion in my employees' eyes, and feeling a sense of pride so profound it almost brought me to my knees. This was real. This was mine. Something I had built from nothing. No handouts, no trust fund, no safety net. In 8 years, that smelly little office became one of the most respected private cybersecurity firms in the nation. We were featured in tech journals. I was asked to speak at industry conferences. My personal net worth quietly climbed into the 8 figures. And my family, they had no clue. To them, I was still just Sarah, the girl with the cute little computer hobby. Their calls were always the same, full of passive-aggressive pity and unsolicited advice. My father would send me job listings for entry-level IT positions at his friends' companies. My mother would offer to send me leftovers from their fancy dinners. And Kevin would just laugh and ask if I was ever going to get a real job. I never corrected them. I just let them believe what they wanted. Their ignorance was my shield. It kept them at a distance. It allowed me to build my world without their interference. Then, 6 months ago, the knock on the door came. Not a literal knock, but an email from the CEO of Nexus Technologies, one of the biggest tech conglomerates on the planet. They didn't just want to partner with us, they wanted to acquire us. The negotiations took 3 months. They were intense, grueling sessions in glass-walled boardrooms that felt a million miles away from my first office. Their initial offer was generous, $40 million. My board was ecstatic. They told me to take it. But I knew what my company was worth. I knew the blood and sweat that had gone into every line of code. I looked the CEO, a man worth billions, dead in the eye and countered, $60 million. And I would retain full operational control of my division, rebranded as Parker Security under the Nexus umbrella. There was a long, tense silence in the room. His advisors were shaking their heads. Then he broke into a slow smile and extended his hand. The day the deal closed, I sat alone in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city, a place my family didn't even know existed. I watched as the wire transfer confirmation hit my account. The number was so large it didn't feel real. $60 million. And in that exact moment, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Sarah, sweetie, I'm just calling to check in. I know it must be so hard for you, living all alone in the city. And with Kevin having some car trouble again, well, you know how it is. If you're ever struggling with your rent, please don't be too proud to ask for our help." I looked at the skyline that was now my backyard, at the confirmation of a fortune I had built with my own 2 hands, and I smiled. It was the most genuine smile I'd had in years. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I'm doing just fine." After the acquisition, I spent a few months in a state of quiet disbelief. Life hadn't changed on the surface. I still drove my reliable 7-year-old sedan. I still lived in the same comfortable, but by no means extravagant, apartment. I kept my head down and focused on integrating my team into the new corporate structure. I was wealthy, yes, but I was still the same person. The secrecy had become a habit, a comfortable armor. But then, the calls started. And the armor began to feel less like protection and more like a cage. It began subtly. A call from Kevin, my brother. It was the first time he'd initiated a call in, maybe 3 years. His voice was slick with a false friendliness that immediately set my teeth on edge. He asked about my work, using industry buzzwords he'd clearly just Googled. He talked about synergy and market disruption. It was bizarre. Then he pivoted. He started asking casual questions about the tech sector, about how much liquid capital companies like mine usually had on hand. Liquid capital. He'd never used a phrase like that in his life. It was like watching a dog try to walk on its hind legs. Awkward, unnatural, and deeply suspicious. I gave him vague, non-committal answers, and a cold feeling started to creep up my spine. A few days later, my father called. He never called just to chat. Every conversation had an agenda. This time, he launched into a long, rambling monologue about the importance of legacy, of building something that lasts. He talked about family assets and investing in our own. He said things like, "At the end of the day, Sarah, all you have is family. Blood is the only real investment." It was the kind of sentimental nonsense he'd never spouted before, and it sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a sales pitch. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I confided in my best friend Chloe over dinner that week. I told her about the strange calls, the out-of-character conversations. She listened patiently, then looked at me with serious eyes. She said, "Sarah, they smell money. Predators can smell a wounded animal from a mile away. To them, your success isn't something to celebrate. It's something to be carved up." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to believe that, deep down, they were still my family, that I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. The air was thick with it. The calm before the inevitable, devastating betrayal. The summons came on a Tuesday morning. A text from my mother. It was a single, imperious line. "Family meeting. Our house. Saturday at noon. Don't be late." There was no, "Please." No. "Hope you can make it." It was a command. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was it. This was the moment the other shoe would drop. I spent the rest of the week in a fog of anxiety. I walked into the lion's den that Saturday feeling like I was already wounded. The atmosphere in my parents' living room was thick with a strange performative tension. My father was pacing in front of the fireplace. My mother was wringing her hands. And Kevin. Kevin was the star of the show. He was standing in the middle of the room with a slick, professionally printed brochure in his hand, a manic energy radiating off him. He looked like a cornered animal trying to bluff his way out of a trap. He launched into his presentation. It was a chaotic mess of get-rich-quick schemes and financial jargon he barely understood. He talked about an exclusive off-market real estate opportunity, a guaranteed high-yield investment in some shady overseas development. It was a classic scam, the kind you see on late-night TV, the kind only a complete fool or a desperate man would fall for. Then came the punchline. He needed $150,000. Immediately. He said it was the initial buy-in to secure his spot. He said it would triple in 6 months. It was a lie. A pathetic, transparent lie. I could see the flop sweat on his forehead. I could see the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't investing. He was drowning. And he was trying to pull me under with him. I stayed silent. I didn't ask questions. I didn't point out the obvious holes in his story. I just watched them. I watched as my mother nodded along, her face a mask of anxious support. I watched as my father stood with his arms crossed, a stern, expectant look on his face. This wasn't just Kevin's idea. This was a coordinated attack. They had rehearsed this. They had planned this. They were a united front. Finally, after a long, painful silence, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room. I said, "Kevin, this is a bad idea. I'm not giving you the money." The change was instantaneous. The friendly facade shattered, Kevin's face contorted with rage. "What do you mean? No," he spat. "After everything this family has done for you?" My mother jumped in, her voice rising with hysteria. "Sarah, think of your brother. His future is on the line. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. How can you be so selfish?" Selfish. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. All those years of working my fingers to the bone, of paying my own way, of never asking for a single dime. And I was the selfish one. But it was my father's words that broke me. He took a step forward, his eyes cold as steel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone was low, menacing, and absolute. He said, "This isn't a request, Sarah, and it's not a discussion." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the threat settle over me like a shroud. Then he delivered the final fatal blow. "This is your duty. We invested in you. We raised you. Now, it is your duty to pay it back." Duty. That one word. It was a gunshot in the silent room of my heart. It echoed in my ears, deafening me to everything else. In that single, brutal moment, every last shred of hope I had for my family turned to ash. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was an asset. An investment they had made, and now it was time to cash in. A walking, talking bank account with their last name. A faceless emergency fund they felt entitled to. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. I could feel the years of quiet resentment, of being overlooked, of being taken for granted, all crystallizing into a single, hard, diamond-sharp point of clarity. I looked at their three faces united against me, their expressions a mixture of greed and righteous indignation, and I finally understood. I finally saw them for who they really were, and right now, I honestly don't know what word to use to describe how that feels. If you're feeling the same sense of outrage I am right now, help me out. Comment with just one word to describe what this family just did, because in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could break down. I could scream. I could fight a battle I was always destined to lose. Or I could let that rage turn into something else. Something cold. Something quiet. Something far, far more dangerous. And as I stood there, in the ruins of what I once called my family, I made my choice. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stood there, motionless. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, now using the word duty like a weapon. I looked at my mother, her face twisted in a mask of manufactured panic, trying to guilt me into saving her precious son. And I looked at Kevin, my brother, who stood there with his hand out, his eyes gleaming with an arrogance that told me he believed, truly believed, that he was entitled to the fruits of my labor. And in that suffocating silence, the lifetime of pain and disappointment didn't feel like a tidal wave anymore. It didn't wash over me. Instead, it compressed. It squeezed all the grief, all the anger, all the desperate yearning for their love into a single, infinitesimally small, ice-cold point in the center of my chest. It was a moment of terrible, absolute clarity. It was like waking up from a 30-year dream. The desperate hope that one day, if I just worked hard enough, if I was just successful enough, they would finally see me. That hope was a fantasy. They were never going to change. They were never going to see me as anything more than a resource, a tool, a means to an end. And that was it. The final brittle thread that connected me to them, it just snapped. It didn't even make a sound. It just turned to dust. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a battlefield after the battle was lost, the calm of accepting an undeniable, unchangeable truth. I looked from my father's face to my mother's to my brother's. 3 strangers. 3 people who shared my blood, but not my heart. Not my soul. I was done. There would be no next time. No more chances. No more quiet sacrifices in the vain hope of earning their affection. The game was over. I had been playing by a set of rules they had written, in a game I was never meant to win. And now I was going to write my own rules. Without saying a single word, I turned around. I picked up my purse from the chair, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out of the living room. I didn't run. I walked with a slow, deliberate pace that I could feel was unnerving them. They were expecting tears. They were expecting a fight. They weren't prepared for the silence. The silence was my answer. As I walked down the familiar hallway, past the photos of a family I no longer recognized as my own, I could hear them start to sputter behind me. My mother's confused. "Sarah? Where are you going?" My father's angry. "Don't you walk away from me." I didn't turn back. I opened the front door, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, and closed it gently behind me. That gentle click of the latch felt more final, more powerful than any slam door ever could. The drive back to the city was a blur. The familiar highway, the passing cars, the endless concrete. It all faded into the background. My mind, for the first time in my life, was completely, utterly quiet. There was no more turmoil, no more second guessing, no more agonizing over what I could have done differently. There was only the cold, hard certainty of what I had to do next. When I got back to my apartment, the first thing I did was walk out onto the balcony. I looked out over the city, my city, a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel that I was a part of, that I had earned my place in. This was my reality, not that suffocating little house in the suburbs filled with ghosts and expectations. This was real. I took a deep breath, the cool city air filling my lungs, and it felt like the first real breath I had taken in years. I walked back inside and went straight to my home office. There was no hesitation. My movements were fluid, methodical, like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face, which was as calm and impassive as a marble statue. The pain hadn't vanished. Oh no, it was still there, that cold point in my chest. But it wasn't a weakness anymore. It had become fuel. It had become a focus. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my actions precise and deliberate. First, I opened a secure line. My first call was to my personal wealth manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I said, "Evelyn, it's Sarah Parker. I need you to initiate a full asset restructuring. We're moving everything into a series of irrevocable trusts, effective immediately." There was a slight pause on the other end. Evelyn was used to my decisive nature, but this was on another level. She asked, "Everything?" "Sarah, an irrevocable trust means just that. Once the assets are in, you can't take them out. It's permanent." I looked out the window at the setting sun. "I know," I said. "That's the point. I want a fortress, Evelyn, ironclad and untouchable, especially by family." My next call was to my lawyer, Ben. He was more than a lawyer, he was a consigliere, a man who had been with me since the early days. He knew my story. He knew the struggles. I laid out the situation with my family in cold, hard facts. No emotion. Just the demand, the threat, the duty. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, with a grim satisfaction in his voice, "It's about time, Sarah. I'll have the paperwork drawn up by morning. We'll protect you, and we'll make sure they can't touch a single dime they didn't earn." The word protect hung in the air. For my entire life, I had been the protector. the one who had to be strong, the one who had to shield others. The idea of someone protecting me, it was a foreign concept, but a welcome one. Finally, I made one last call. It was to Margot, my executive assistant. She was more than an assistant. She was my right hand, the person who knew the rhythm of my life better than anyone. Her efficiency was legendary. "Margot," I said, "I need to schedule a trip for next Saturday. A short one, but the arrival needs to make a statement." I paused, thinking. "I need you to charter a helicopter. A Bell 429, if possible. Black. I want it to land at a residential address in the suburbs. Yes. The front lawn is plenty big enough." Margot didn't ask why. She didn't question the extravagance. She just said, in her calm, capable voice, "Consider it done, Sarah. I'll have the confirmation and flight plan sent to you by the end of the day." After the calls were made, I sat back in my chair. The sun had completely set, and the city lights were twinkling to life. A galaxy of ambition lay out before me. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I didn't see the hurt little girl anymore. I didn't see the daughter desperate for approval. I saw a CEO, a strategist, a queen in her castle, quietly moving her pieces into place on the chessboard. They thought they were in control. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought, as they always had, that they could dictate the terms of my life. They had no idea that I wasn't just planning to decline their demand. I was planning to change the entire game, and next Saturday, they were going to find out just how badly they had underestimated their little girl. The week leading up to the showdown was the quietest of my life. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their barrage of texts, which ranged from my mother's tearful guilt trips to my father's angry demands. I just let them stew. I let their arrogance and their certainty build. I knew their playbook. They would assume my silence was a sign of weakness. They would think I was wrestling with my duty, and that, eventually, I would cave. Just like I always had. On Friday afternoon, I sent a single, simple text to the family group chat. "I've made my decision. I have an answer for you. Meet me at the house tomorrow, noon." I didn't offer any more details. I let the ambiguity hang in the air, a perfectly crafted piece of bait. And I knew they would take it. When I pulled up to my childhood home the next day, right at noon, I wasn't driving my usual sedan. I had taken a car service. It was a deliberate choice, a small, subtle signal that the ground was about to shift beneath their feet. I walked up the familiar path, my heart not pounding with anxiety, but with a slow, steady, cold rhythm, the rhythm of a predator. I was no longer the prey. I was here to hunt. They were already in the living room, exactly as I knew they would be. My father stood by the fireplace trying to look imposing. My mother was perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, and Kevin was practically vibrating with smug confidence. He was so sure he had won. He was already spending the money in his head. He gave me a condescending little smile as I walked in, as if to say, "About time you came to your senses." My father cleared his throat, taking charge of the room in his usual domineering way. He started his speech, the one he had probably been rehearsing all week. "Good," he began, his voice laced with patronizing approval. "I'm glad you finally decided to be reasonable, Sarah. We were worried you were going to let your emotions get the better of you, but we knew you'd eventually see the logic. You've always been the sensible one after all." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were calling me sensible for agreeing to set $150,000 on fire to save my reckless, incompetent brother from a mess of his own making. The narrative was so ingrained in them, they couldn't see the absurdity. Kevin couldn't contain himself. He stepped forward, already acting like a conquering hero. "So, about the wire transfer. he said. I'll text you the account details. The sooner we get it done, the better. These kinds of opportunities don't wait around, you know. I let him finish. I let them both bask in their victory for a few more seconds. I savored the moment, the peak of their arrogance, the absolute pinnacle of their delusion. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and cut through their self-congratulatory atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. No. It was just one word, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. They all stared at me, their smiles frozen on their faces. What? What did you say? My father stammered, his composure cracking for the first time. I said no, I repeated, letting each syllable hang in the air. The answer is no. There will be no $150,000. Not now. Not ever. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a stunned, angry disbelief. Kevin's face turned a blotchy red. You can't be serious, he yelled. This is my future we're talking about, after everything we've done for you. My father found his voice, his anger returning. What is the meaning of this, Sarah? This is about family. This is about responsibility. I held up a hand, and to my surprise, they actually fell silent. You're right, I said, my voice dangerously soft. This is about family. It's about securing this family's future, which is why I'm not giving Kevin a dime. Their confusion was palpable. I continued. Instead of flushing money down the drain on another one of his failed schemes, I want to talk about a real financial plan, a long-term strategy for your retirement, for your health care, something sustainable. That was when Kevin laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound, filled with a decade of resentment and perceived superiority. Oh my God, he sneered, looking at our parents as if to share the joke. Little sister Sarah is going to teach us about finance now? You, with your sad little hobby job? What are you going to do? Show us how to budget with coupons? He turned his full attention to me, his eyes dripping with contempt. That's a fairy tale idea, Sarah. Just like all your other little dreams. Why don't you come back down to reality and let the adults handle the real world? A fairy tale, he called my life's work. A fairy tale. That was the first trigger, the attack on my vision, the thing I had bled for. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees the checkmate 3 moves ahead. You're right, Kevin, I said softly. My work does feel like a fairy tale sometimes. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Especially 6 months ago, when that sad little hobby job of mine was acquired by Nexus Technologies for $60 million. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went completely slack, the color draining from it. Kevin just stared, his mouth hanging open, his brain visibly short-circuiting as he tried to process the number. $60 million. He was the first to speak, his voice a choked whisper. What? What are you talking about? That's impossible. No one makes that kind of money that fast. Not legally. He took a step toward me, his eyes wide with a desperate, greedy suspicion. What did you do, Sarah? Who did you know? Did some rich guy set you up? My mother, ever the romantic, jumped on that train of thought. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice trembling. Did you meet someone? A silent partner, maybe? Someone who helped you? That was it. That was the second and final trigger. The slandering of my integrity. The ultimate insult. They saw the helicopter. They were sitting in my mansion. They had heard the number. But their minds, their small, prejudiced minds, still could not compute the reality that I, the scapegoat, the afterthought, had achieved this on my own. They would rather believe I was a criminal, a fraud, or some rich man's kept woman than accept the simple, undeniable truth of my competence. The rage I felt was no longer hot. It was arctic. It was a glacier of fury, moving with unstoppable force. And just as they were grappling with that impossible thought, a new sound began to filter into the room, a faint, rhythmic chopping noise from a distance. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It grew steadily louder, closer, a deep, resonant thumping that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "What on earth is that?" my mother asked, her voice filled with a new kind of alarm. My father walked to the window, his face a mask of confusion. Outside, a sleek black Bell 429 helicopter was descending from the sky, its powerful rotors whipping the leaves on the front lawn into a miniature tornado. It was a machine of intimidating power and wealth, an alien object landing in their quiet, suburban world. They all stared, speechless. I, however, remained perfectly calm. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, glancing at the screen. "Ah," I said, as if noticing the time. "Right on schedule." I stood up and smoothed down my jacket. They all turned to look at me, their faces a collage of utter, dumbfounded shock. "That," I announced, my voice ringing with a clarity and power they had never heard from me before, "is my ride. I have a board meeting in the Hamptons I need to get to." I walked towards the door, my heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. I paused at the threshold and turned back to look at them one last time. They were frozen, like statues in a museum exhibit titled, "The Moment Their World Ended." I looked directly at my brother, at Kevin. His face was a pathetic ruin of envy and disbelief. "You needed $150,000, right?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion except a faint, clinical curiosity. "Just so you know, the annual insurance premium on that helicopter costs more than that. Good luck with your investment." And with that, I turned my back on them, on their greed, on their suffocating expectations, and on the entire life they had tried to chain me to. I walked out the front door into the whirlwind of my new reality and didn't look back. As the helicopter ascended, the familiar sight of my childhood home shrank below me, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just another house on just another suburban street. The noise of the rotors was deafening, but inside my noise-canceling headset, there was a profound silence. It was the silence of a chapter closing. The silence of a long, painful war is finally coming to an end. Down below, I could see 3 tiny figures standing on the lawn, frozen in place. Statues in a garden of their own making. The silence after the helicopter was gone, I imagine, must have been even more stunning than the noise itself. It was the sound of their universe being fractured, the sound of reality crashing down on them with the weight of $60 million. For a long moment, nobody moved. The phantom thumping of the helicopter blades still echoed in their ears. The grass on the lawn, flattened by the downdraft, was the only physical evidence that what had just happened was real. My mother was the first to break the spell. Her voice was a thin, trembling whisper that was almost carried away by the breeze. She said, "It's a joke, right? It has to be some kind of elaborate, cruel joke." She was looking for confirmation, for anyone to agree with her, to help her rebuild the reality that had just been shattered. My father, his face pale and waxy, just shook his head slowly. He mumbled, "No, that was real. The call letters on the tail, that was a privately chartered aircraft." He knew. In his world of money and power, he recognized the authentic display of wealth. He knew this wasn't a joke, and that was when the panic started. It began with Kevin. The shock in his eyes curdled into a frantic, wild-eyed desperation. "60 million?" he choked out, the number sounding obscene coming from his lips. No, no way. She's lying. She has to be lying. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He started pacing the lawn like a caged animal, stabbing at the screen, trying to call me. Pick up, you lying! Each time the call went straight to voicemail, his panic escalated. The realization that he had been demanding a paltry $150,000 from a woman who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over was a humiliation so profound it was driving him insane. The shockwave hit them all. The consequences of their actions, of their greed, of their epic miscalculation, started to cascade in their minds. For Kevin, it was the immediate, terrifying reality that his financial lifeline was gone. The dangerous people he owed money to weren't going to care about a family drama. They just wanted their money. For my father, it was the crushing blow to his ego. He, the patriarch, the financial wizard, had been so completely blind. His daughter, the one he had written off as a failure, had built an empire under his very nose. It was a failure of his judgment, a failure of his control. For my mother, it was the social implication, the shame, the story that would surely get out. What would the neighbors think? What would her friends at the country club say? Their shared panic propelled them into action. They scrambled into my father's car, a luxury sedan that now seemed pathetically inadequate. My father drove with a reckless urgency, speeding towards the city, towards me, as if he could somehow reverse time by sheer force of will. In the back seat, my mother was sobbing hysterically, and in the passenger seat, Kevin was a whirlwind of frantic energy. He was screaming into his phone at some friend who worked in the tech industry, demanding he look up the Nexus acquisition of Parker Security. "Just check it," he yelled. "It has to be public record. Find it." He was a man desperately searching for proof of a miracle or proof of a lie. He didn't know which one would be worse. They arrived at my apartment building, a sleek glass tower that loomed over the street like a monument to a world they didn't belong in. They abandoned the car and rushed into the lobby, only to be stopped by the calm, immovable presence of my doorman, a man named Michael who was built like a refrigerator and had the placid demeanor of a Buddhist monk. He stepped in front of them, a polite but firm barrier. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even. My father, reverting to his default mode of arrogant authority, puffed out his chest. "We're here to see Sarah Parker," he announced. "I'm her father." Michael simply nodded, his expression unchanging. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, "but Ms. Parker has left explicit instructions that she is not to be disturbed. She is not accepting any unannounced visitors." My father's face turned purple with rage. "Don't you know who I am?" he sputtered. "I am her father. Let me up." Michael didn't even blink. "I understand, sir," he repeated, his voice still perfectly calm. "But my instructions are absolute." The automated glass doors slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing them out. They were left standing on the cold marble, staring at their own distorted reflections, shut out of my life by a barrier of wealth and a simple, firm no. When they realized they couldn't reach me physically, they resorted to the only weapons they had left. The weapons they had been using against me my entire life: guilt, manipulation, and rage. My phone, which I had placed on my desk and set to silent, began to light up with a relentless barrage of notifications. It was a digital siege. First came the voicemails from my mother, each one more tearful and desperate than the last. "Sarah, how could you do this to me? To your family?" she cried in one. "After all the sacrifices I made for you? Your brother is in trouble, real trouble, and you're playing these cruel, powerful games. You're destroying this family." It was a masterful performance. She cast herself as the martyr, the long-suffering mother betrayed by her cold-hearted, ungrateful daughter. She conveniently forgot all the years she had enabled Kevin, all the times she had dismissed my accomplishments. Then came the texts from my father. They were short, brutal, and written in all caps, as if the sheer volume of his words could intimidate me into submission. "You will fix this. Now," one read. Another said, "I am still your father. You owe me your respect. We need to talk." He wasn't asking, he was commanding. He still believed even now that his authority over me was absolute. He couldn't grasp that his reign was over. And then there was Kevin. His voicemails were a wild, terrifying journey through the 5 stages of grief. It started with desperate bargaining. "Sarah, please, just pick up. We can talk about this. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I need your help. My life is on the line. I'm not kidding." When that didn't work, it quickly devolved into pure, unfiltered rage. "Fine. Be that way," he screamed in the final message, his voice cracking with fury. "You selfish bitch! You've always been jealous of me. You probably loved seeing me beg. This is all your fault. You did this. You ruined everything." It was a spectacular implosion. In the space of 5 minutes, he had gone from groveling for a handout to blaming me for the consequences of his own disastrous life choices. It was the anthem of the golden child, a song I had been forced to listen to my entire life. I listened to all of it. I read every word, and I felt nothing. The part of me that could be wounded by them was gone. I was just an observer now, watching a train wreck in slow motion. The final act of their collapse happened, as I later learned, in the car on their way home. Defeated and exhausted, they finally turned on each other. My mother, through her sobs, accused my father of being too hard on me, of pushing me away. My father, his ego in tatters, roared back that she was the one who had turned Kevin into a helpless parasite who couldn't survive in the real world, and Kevin, trapped between them, just screamed for them both to shut up. It was the spectacular, inevitable collapse of a family built on a foundation of lies, entitlement, and inequity. And I was finally free of the wreckage. After the storm comes the quiet. The barrage of calls and texts lasted for another 48 hours, a desperate, chaotic flurry of digital noise. And then it stopped. The silence they left behind was vast and empty, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of freedom. For years I had begged for a seat at their table, a table where I was never truly welcome. Now it was time to build my own table and decide for myself who was worthy of a seat. I knew a confrontation would be pointless. It would just devolve into the same old script of tears, accusations, and emotional blackmail. My old self would have waded into that fight, trying to make them understand, trying to fix the unfixable. But the new me? She operated differently. She operated with the same cold, strategic precision I used to run my company. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, Ben, the following Monday. I walked into his polished downtown office not as a victim, but as a client, a CEO. I was calm, my instructions clear. I wasn't there to vent or to cry. I was there to build a wall. A legal fortress so high and so strong that its toxicity could never breach it again. Ben listened, his expression grim but professional. When I finished, he nodded slowly. He said, "Sarah, this is the smartest move you could make. You can't reason with emotional vampires. You can only cut off their supply." He drafted an email while I was sitting there. It was a masterpiece of cold, legal prose. It was a declaration of independence. The email was sent simultaneously to my father, my mother, and my brother. I can only imagine the sound their phones made when it arrived, a unified chime signaling the end of an era. The contents were simple, direct, and left no room for negotiation. First, it stated that all future communication with me regarding any matter must be directed through Ben's law firm. Any attempt to contact me directly, by phone, text, email, or in person, would be considered harassment and would be met with legal action. Second, it informed them that I had, of my own free will, established a substantial, irrevocable trust. The sole purpose of this trust was to cover the legitimate, documented, long-term healthcare costs for my parents. It would be managed by an independent third-party financial institution. They would have no direct control over the funds. All other financial requests of any kind would be denied. The email was a legal document, but it was also a statement. It said, "I will honor my duty as a daughter to ensure you are cared for. But I will no longer be your bank. I will no longer be your safety net. The ATM is officially closed for business." And finally, as Ben hit send, I took out my own phone. I opened my contacts list. I found my father's name, block. My mother's name, block. My brother's name, block. Each tap of the screen was a small, quiet act of liberation, a digital severing of a cord that should have been cut years ago. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't waiting for their call. I wasn't dreading their next demand. I had taken back control. I had chosen myself. This was a huge moment, a turning point built on years of pain and newfound strength. If you support this powerful decision she made to finally put herself first, show some love in the comments. Drop a flexed bicep emoji down below to send her some strength for the journey ahead. Because that support, even from strangers, is exactly what you need when you're rebuilding your life from the ground up. In the days that followed, a strange and wonderful thing began to happen. The space that had been filled with my family's drama, with their endless needs and constant criticism, was now quiet. And into that quiet, other voices began to emerge. Voices of genuine support. Voices of true friendship. It was the beginning of my chosen family. My best friend Chloe showed up at my apartment that night with 2 bottles of expensive champagne. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just poured 2 glasses, handed one to me, and said, "To the Queen. Long may she reign." We sat on my balcony for hours, talking and laughing, and for the first time, I felt truly seen. She saw me not as a success story or a victim, but just as Sarah, her friend. A few days later, I had lunch with my old mentor David, the man who gave me my first big break in the tech world. He was a shrewd, tough old businessman who had seen it all. I told him what had happened. He stirred his coffee, a thoughtful look on his face. He said, "Sarah, in business, you learn quickly that you have to cut dead weight to grow. Sometimes the dead weight is a bad product line. Sometimes it's a toxic employee." He looked me right in the eye. "And sometimes it's family. You didn't do something cruel. You did something necessary. You made an executive decision about your own life, and it was the right one." His validation, coming from a man I respected so deeply, felt like a shield. It reinforced the idea that my strength wasn't cruelty. It was a form of self-preservation. Even my lawyer, Ben, became a part of this new support system. He called me a week later. He said, "Just to update you, they received the email. They are not happy." There was some shouting. But the message was received. The wall is holding. He said it with professional satisfaction, but also with an undercurrent of personal respect. I wasn't just another case file to him. I was a person he was actively helping to protect. These were the people who formed the foundation of my new life, my chosen family. They weren't bound to me by blood. They were bound to me by something far stronger. Mutual respect, genuine affection, and a shared understanding of my worth. They didn't want anything from me. They just wanted things from me. And that made all the difference. I was learning that true family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. One honest, supportive, and respectful relationship at a time. 2 years. It sounds like a long time, but the first 2 years of my real freedom passed in the blink of an eye. It was like learning how to breathe again after being underwater for decades. The air was sweeter. The colors were brighter. Life was mine. I stepped down from the day-to-day operations at my old company, trusting the brilliant team I had built to carry on the mission. Instead, I moved out west, to a small house on the California coast, where the sound of the ocean replaced the noise of the city. I founded a small venture capital firm with a very specific purpose: to fund and mentor female entrepreneurs, the kind of young, hungry women who were told their ideas were cute hobbies, just like I had been. I found a new kind of wealth in watching their dreams take flight, a wealth far more satisfying than any number in a bank account. My life became quiet, purposeful, and peaceful. I even learned how to surf. Badly. But it was the trying that mattered. Meanwhile, back on the East Coast, the consequences I had set in motion were playing out. You can't shield people from reality forever. Eventually, the bill always comes due. Without my money to bail him out, Kevin's house of cards collapsed. The investment opportunity was a sham, and the people he owed money to were not the forgiving type. He lost everything. My parents, in a desperate attempt to save him, drained their retirement accounts and sold the family home I grew up in. They moved into a small condo, their social standing shattered, their golden years tarnished by the mess their golden boy had made. I didn't take any pleasure in their downfall, but I didn't feel guilty either. They weren't the victims of my success. They were the architects of their own ruin. I had just stopped being the foundation for their dysfunctional empire. Kevin, stripped of his safety net, was forced to do something he had avoided his entire life. He got a job. A real one. Working at a car rental agency at the airport. It was humbling. It was hard. And it was exactly what he needed. I thought I would never speak to any of them again. I had accepted that. But about a year and a half after I had left, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Kevin. I almost deleted it without reading. But something made me pause. The subject line just said, "I'm sorry." I opened it. His words, typed out on the screen, were simple, direct, and stripped of all his usual arrogance. He wrote that he wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted to say that I had been right about everything. He called himself a spoiled failure who had taken my strength for granted. He said he was trying to stand on his own 2 feet now, and that it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He ended it with just 2 words. "I'm sorry." There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda. It was the first truly honest thing he had ever said to me. I didn't reply right away. I let the email sit for a week. I thought about what forgiveness really meant. It didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean tearing down the walls I had so carefully built. It meant accepting the apology that was offered and choosing to move forward without the weight of the past. I agreed to meet him. We met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop halfway between his world and mine. It was awkward. He looked older, tired, but there was a new clarity in his eyes. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just talked. Like 2 adults. He told me about his job. I told him about my new life. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement. The start of something new, built on a foundation of hard-earned truth and clear, unshakable boundaries. As I flew home that evening, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of orange and purple, I realized the final lesson. My value was never determined by them. It was determined by me. Financial independence wasn't about buying helicopters or mansions. It was about buying my own freedom. The freedom to say no. The freedom to choose my own life. And I learned that real family is the people who invest in you, not the ones who cash you out. They're built on respect, not obligation. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching their world crumble. It was building my own world so high, so strong, and so beautiful that their voices and their judgment became nothing more than a distant, meaningless whisper on the wind. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took you for granted? How did you handle it? Have you ever had to set those difficult, painful boundaries? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone is the first step toward taking back your power. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening.